Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending the RTA's meeting of our Board of Directors. I want to review a couple of guidelines, as always, before our meeting begins. For the members who are here in person, first of all, thank you for being here in person, and please turn off your microphones or turn on your microphones when you wish to speak and off when you're finished, so we limit background noise and make sure only one person is speaking at a time. I will call on those with questions or comments for those who are here in person. If you're calling in remotely, and we have a couple of you today, and hope you're somewhere warm, keep your audio on mute as much as possible to minimize background noise, which may impair the recording. When you have a question or comment, please raise your virtual hand, and the board secretary will call on members who have raised their hand one at a time. And when she calls on you, try to remember to lower your hand and unmute yourself before you speak. With that said, I will now officially call the order of this meeting of the Board of Directors of the Regional Transportation Authority. And will everyone in person please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Teachers always tell me that's how it's a good way to start the morning because it gets their classrooms of teenagers to quiet down. So, but it's nice to recite the pledge. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Director Carey, Director Colson. Here. Director Gathing, Director Gorman. No, she's online. Director Groven.
Here.
Director Jenkins.
Here.
Director Katarik.
Here.
Director Lewis.
Here.
Director Mondero.
Here.
Director Pang. Director Rotondo.
Here.
Director Ross.
Here.
Director Ryan.
Here.
Director Sager.
Here.
Director Yonan.
Here.
Chairman Dillard.
Present.
I see Director Gorman's on there. So
Here.
we have 13 present and 3 absent.
I heard Director Gorman's voice, Madam Secretary, so add Elizabeth Gorman to the roll, please.
Will do.
Thank you.
Voice? Did you hear my voice as well?
Yes, Director.
Got it,
Lewis.
Director Lewis. It's always good to hear your voice.
Thank you.
Now that we've established that we have a physical quorum, our board secretary has received completed notice from directors Gathing, Gorman, Lewis, and Pang indicating they cannot attend in person. Pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, they are deemed admitted unless there's any objection from any of the members that are here. Seeing none, the directors may participate remotely. Item 3 is the approval of the minutes from the board meeting and executive session held on January 16th of 2025. You've all received those in advance. Are there any comments or corrections to those minutes? Seeing none, how about a motion and a second to adopt and approve the board minutes from January 16th? Director Ross moves that we approve, seconded by Dr. Sager. And with that, Joey, please take the roll.
Sure. Director Carey, Director Colson.
Yes.
Director Gathing, Director Gorman,
Aye.
Director Groven,
Aye.
Director Jenkins,
Aye.
Director Katarik,
Aye.
Director Lewis,
Yes.
Director Mondero, Director Pang, Director Rotondo,
Yes.
Director Ross,
Yes.
Director Ryan,
Yes.
Director Sager, Director Yonan,
Aye.
and Chairman Dillard.
Yes.
13 ayes.
Our minutes from the last meeting are approved. Item 4 is the public comments segment of the meeting. Any comments received will now be read into the record by the board secretary. Have you received any?
We have not received any written comments.
I believe there's one gentleman. Let me know if there's more. Mr. Mike Archie, who wishes to speak today. Michael, are you out there? There you are. Good morning.
Green. Okay. Hello, Chairman, Board, and staff. My name is Mike Archie. I'm an energy and carbon management entrepreneur with subject matter expertise in renewable natural gas. I have no political power. I have no position of influence, and I do not spend large sums of money on campaigns or lobbying. In other words, I'm nobody sent. That said, I am a citizen, I'm a taxpayer, I'm a 30-year user of Chicago Regional Transit, and I have alternative fuels expertise. Lastly, as Chairman Diller can attest, I am persistent. I've come here today, once again, requesting fair consideration of a significant cost efficiency measure that thus far the transit agencies and RTA staff have not given a just evaluation. It is material cost saving opportunity in rolling stock in fuel with hundreds of millions of dollars of CapEx savings and tens of millions in OpEx cost savings. Given the dire fiscal situation of Chicago Region Transit, the significant issues with EV performance, EV supply chain issues, coupled with current presidential administration, I am perplexed and frustrated with the lack of interest by the transit agencies. As such, I'm requesting this governing body to please intervene and directly evaluate the opportunity for yourselves. Okay, please let the data and the numbers speak for themselves. Okay, I stop there. Thank you for hearing me out. I hope you will invite me to sit with you to discuss the details of this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Archie. Appreciate it. All right, let's go on to item 5, the Executive Director's Report. Leanne?
Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've got a lot to share with you today under our Transit is the Answer update, so I'll be fairly brief. But just want to make sure that you have on your calendars and that you're aware that the next summit that we will be hosting will be on Tuesday, April 15th. At the Cultural Center here in Chicago. There's more details that'll be coming out pretty soon, and nobody could actually register yet, but I just wanted to flag it for your calendars if you're interested in attending. It'll be largely focused on sort of the vision and the proposal that the chairman's discussed at City Club regarding transforming transit. So I also wanted to provide a quick update on the resolution that the board passed last meeting, requesting information from the 3 service boards with respect to plans if we are successful in getting the $1.5 billion investment to expand the transit system. The other side of that coin of if we are unsuccessful and we have to look at service cuts, fare increasing and sort of shrinking the system, what those plans might look like, as well as potential efficiencies. I am happy to report that the service boards, the first deadline, as you probably recall, was, in what month are we in? February. And so we will be coming back to you in March with a full report. They all met the deadline and provided us with substantial information. So we are really pleased with that progress. And I can give you my commitment as well as our senior team's commitment that we continue to work with all 3 service boards on refining that information. So we'll have a good and thorough report for you at the next meeting. And we can talk about that a little bit more in a bit. Last Friday also was the deadline for the service. Oh, sorry, I already discussed that. So next slide, please. Yes. So from March 10 through April 4, we'll be accepting applications for our community planning projects. The call will once again be held in conjunction with or in partnership with CMAP, Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. The RTA Community Planning Program provides transportation and land use technical assistance to municipalities throughout the region to help them meet their goals for development in and around transit and for improved access to transit services. This includes equitable transit-oriented development plans, transit corridor studies, curb management plans, and a variety of other implementation assistance. This year, the RTA will have an added focus on transit accessibility, focused on neighborhood access to transit improvement plans. These will really help us develop detailed accessibility recommendations surrounding transit bus and rail stations for people walking to trains and or using bicycles. Once completed, these plans can also serve as a basis for engineering and construction funding, applications to a variety of sources, as well as including sort of access to the RTA's Transit Access Program, where we actually provide some of those funds as well. Priority this year is going to be given to applicants who represent communities of need, ensuring that RTA assistance is supporting municipalities that really need it the most. Project selection is expected to be completed by the end of June, followed by a public comment period, and a presentation of the program of projects will be presented to you at the July meeting. Some more details will be available soon on our website and in our agency newsletter, so look for that. But I encourage you to sort of help spread the word amongst your connections, colleagues, and people you interact with, and communities to about this program for their consideration. So next slide. The RTA is currently also accepting applications from local governments, private, non-profit organizations, and transportation providers for what is called 5310 funding. 5310 is Enhancement Mobility of Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities program. It's a federal funded program that aims to improve mobility, removing barriers to transportation services, and expanding transportation mobility options. So we estimate at this point that there will be approximately $15.3 million in federal funds available for award through this current cycle. The applications are due April 24, and the recommended program of projects will be presented to this board back in the fall. The program information and online application will be available on our website in the coming days. So next slide. As usual, you're going to hear from Rob Nash with a strong focus on our Springfield activities. So I'll just focus on the federal side of things for now. As you may be aware, since January 20, President Trump has issued approximately 100 executive orders, memorandum, proclamations to carry out his administration's policy goals and agenda. In line with these directives, the U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy released several memos laying out new principles used to govern the administration of U.S. DOT's policies, programs, and activities. APTA, or the American Public Transportation Association, has, very helpfully for all of us trying to keep up, created an executive and regulatory actions tracker that provides real-time updates and summaries of each of these EOs and other administrative actions as they are coming out that impact the transit industry. So it's a tool for all of us to try to sort of understand how things are progressing, changing, etc. The service boards to this point have reported no interruption in their program funding, formula funding flowing to them. The RTA staff are working with our agency's federal lobbying team and our region's congressional delegation to continue to sort of work through and try to ascertain sort of the impacts of these directives on discretionary programs and on future funding. So we continue to stay on top of this as much as we can. On a final note, too, on January 28, Rob and his team presented the RTA's Transforming Transit Vision to 10 officers representing our congressional delegation. In the meeting, they also discussed the potential impacts of these EOs and other directives on both our funding and even more immediately, potentially on operations of public transit systems. These discussions are going to be ongoing as we look to work through the FY25 appropriations and the federal budget reconciliation process as that all continues, and as we begin conversations about reauthorization of the federal transportation bill, and those conversations are going to really start to happen sometime later this year. So a lot going on there. So just to wrap up, after my report, you will hear an update from the most recent RTA Citizens Advisory Board meeting from Jackie Forbes, followed by the Transit is the Answer implementation update. We'll ask for your vote on financial results for the fourth quarter, a resolution honoring former CTA President Dorval Carter, and the approval of some travel expense reimbursements. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Director Yonan?
Thanks, Leanne. I know with just kind of the time spent going through some of the grant opportunities that RTA, graciously, reaches out and, does make that impact in the community. I know we've talked in the past, my old life about opportunities with the Invest in Cook program. Since our last meeting, that application is on the street for another month. And again, really encourage, the RTA to maybe put in an application, with the Invest in Cook, because the reach that some of these DOTs obviously in Cook County has with some of the communities. I know, there's a lot of requests for things as simple as, bus pads, shelters that, are looking to have that pad installed, sidewalks, things that you all know that perhaps, and it's only 8-page application, your team could put one together. And I think it would really go a long way in your partnership with Cook County.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. That's some good advice and direction for us too. I think we're always looking for additional funding, especially in those small we kind of think of them as micro projects, right? Sometimes it's that, but for if you just had that little extension of the sidewalk and finding the capital money. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a great suggestion. Director Quinteric?
Leanne, thanks for all of the work on the resolution from last month. It's encouraging to see that everybody's working together to put together a pretty good presentation for next month. Just a question, could you talk a little bit about, there was 2 on the savings and efficiencies, which again is really important. Heard this from the governor in his budget speech about really trying to make sure that we're doing everything we can to reduce the fiscal cliff, et cetera. But in our conversations last month, we talked about both current state and savings that can happen now.
Mhm.
And Director Mondero and Director Carey and Sagar and many others were talking about, this discussion of the future state. If things were different, those are both in the resolution. Are you getting what you need, and do you have the resources you need to sort of figure both of those situations out, both today and what a future could look like in a different, governance change or other sort of shared services?
Yeah, I think we are working towards both. In the more immediate term, we're looking for the things that we can, what we're doing actually, I would actually argue sort of or propose 3 things. One is collecting and documenting the efficiencies and improvements that they have made over the past year, a couple of years or so, right? So documenting all of that, then looking at the more immediate things that the 3 agencies or 4 of us can all do collectively and sometimes individually. There can be efficiencies that they can recognize internally. So identifying all of those immediate things. But ultimately, one of the things that we have been working with and creating an opportunity for the service boards is partnering and hosting some conversations with some of our peers around the country who are a bit ahead of the game in this some challenging and unfortunate situation. So, and WMATA in Washington, D.C. have been very generous with their time in terms of hosting conversations with us and sort of laying out what they have done to date and what they are continuing to do for the future. And that's not just a meeting that they're having with us. We actually made that available to the 3 service boards. So they're hearing from people on the ground. So they're understanding sort of what we're talking about, what we're looking for, but what others are doing in that space and what they've learned, what worked, what didn't work, what are the maybe short-term things that you can gain, and then some of the long-term things. I think ultimately, from my perspective, my hope is that this becomes kind of an ongoing effort. It's not just a one and done kind of thing. It's something that we think about, how do we continue to be streamlined and efficient across all of our operations as we go forward. So I think that there will be ongoing conversations beyond March to actually sort of execute and realize, not just realize even the short-term savings, but even I continue to look for ways to identify longer-term things. WMATA gave examples of things like real estate spaces and things like that, but some of those leases took several years to unwind. So that's on their agenda. They haven't realized it yet, but they're working to do that, and it's sort of consolidation of certain activities and functions. So those things are certainly on our radar, and if we sort of, we will keep you apprised of that. And I see this as sort of an ongoing sort of budgetary process as well as we sort of think through what the future looks like.
Director Mondero.
Thanks. Thank you for all the information regarding the presentation that will come in March. When do you expect that the documentation can be provided to the board in advance? I know that we typically get things from
A week before.
staff several days before, but
Yeah.
you know, because this is going to be such a weighty topic with a lot of nuance, I'd appreciate if we can get it even in advance of a week.
So I think what we're doing at the staff level now is obviously got that first cut of the information, looking to see what it looks like. Where are there any gaps still? Are there things we want further clarification on? And that's a lot of back and forth. The finance teams are meeting regularly on this across the 3 service boards. The same with the planning kind of capital folks as well. And I can tell you that myself and the EDs, we've met every week actually, and want to continue to do that kind of frequency as best we can as we're sort of marching towards the May deadline. So all these things are back and forth. We're trying to sort of knit this together, and if we just kind of, it's not ready to be sort of shared, I think, in any meaningful way yet. We're trying to knit together kind of what that looks like in terms of helping people understand sort of what those efficiencies are, what their individual improvements could be, what the collective ones can be. So I think we can probably share some preliminary stuff. Normally we get our board packet out a week before the board meeting, but we could look to try to share some preliminary stuff with you sooner. All 3 of the, like I said, all 3 of the service boards are continuing to kind of work on their details.
To be helpful. Any other questions or comments? Yep, Dr. Sager.
Leanne, I just want to double check. Is Rob going to be here presenting then or talking to us this morning about legislative efforts?
Yeah, in his update, we'll talk about sort of all things Springfield, which incorporates that. And there is, as we've said with the board in the past, we have begun at the staff level working on what could be draft legislative language around the reform agenda. And, I think that some of that could come together. I think the way we're thinking about this is it comes together in the March meeting for discussion and input from the board.
Perfect. I'll hold my comments then. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Just one thing everyone should watch. Yesterday, the president curtailed the congestion tax in New York City. So that will be interesting to watch to see how that proceeds and what either the governor or the mayor of New York does with respect to that. But that's one that we just kind of need to watch.
So actually, I think you probably recall, I don't remember which board member, but asked about it last meeting. And actually, it's going to be part of the update that we're going to give you in a minute.
Good. It's important. It'll be good theater too. So, all right. Finished, Leanne. Let's move on to 6A, and that's an update on the activities of the RTA Transit Access Citizens Advisory Board. And Jackie Forbes, good morning.
All right. Good morning, Chairman Dillard and members of the Board of Directors. Thank you for your time this morning. My name is Jackie Forbes. I am the chairperson of the RTA Citizens Advisory Board, and I'm here to provide an update of the activities of the board. Our last meeting of the RTA-CAB was on January 27th, 2025, and at this meeting, staff provided 2 presentations on RTA initiatives. In addition, Jasmine Vega, who is the McHenry County representative on the RTA-CAB, provided a presentation on a new transit service for McHenry County residents. First, Leanne Redden and Rob Nash briefed the RTA-CAB on the Transforming Transit Report and the RTA Board resolution that was passed at your January RTA Board meeting. It requires RTA staff to work with the service boards to get further information on the impacts of not receiving the funding needed to address the fiscal cliff, as well as details on potential service expansion if additional funding is received. You will receive a briefing on these topics today, so I'll just share the RTA-CAB member feedback on the Transforming Transit Report. Members stated that it was very important that the RTA and service boards are focused on equity for any service cuts or expansions made to the system. Members were concerned about fares being raised for customers without first seeing significant improvements to performance and safety. There were some concerns voiced over increasing taxes to fill the budget gap. And one member suggested a taxation model that would only tax areas of the region with concentrated transit service. We were informed that the RTA will provide the RTA CAB additional information over the next several meetings as state lawmakers discuss proposals to address the fiscal cliff and will reach out to involve CAB members in calls to action. Next, Heather Mullins, Division Manager, Local Planning and Program Management, and Michael Horsting, Manager, Local Programs, educated the RTA CAB of several current initiatives in the Local Planning Division of the RTA. These include a recently developed transit-friendly communities guide created to help support, encourage, and educate decision makers on ways to make their communities more transit-friendly and identify barriers to and opportunities for transit-friendly development. The upcoming call for project proposals for the Community Planning Program, which provides technical assistance to help communities plan and implement transit-oriented development projects. An upcoming call for project proposals for the Section 5310 program, which provides funding for public transportation projects that focus on enhancing mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities. The launch of a project to update the region's Human Services Transportation Plan, or the HSTP, which is required for all designated recipients of Section 5310 funds. An HSTP identifies the local transit system's transportation needs for individuals with disabilities, seniors, and people experiencing low incomes with strategies for meeting those needs. Lastly, Jasmine Vega, McHenry County Division of Transportation, provided an overview of the new MC Ride Connect program, which provides a rider subsidy on Uber and U-Serve to McHenry County residents who hold an active RTA fare permit. Riders pay the first $4 for any Uber or U-Serve trip originating in the county, and McHenry County DOT covers the next $16 of the trip cost. The program provides an alternative to the traditional MC Ride program, is more convenient for many customers, and frees up service on the traditional MC Ride service for users who do not have an RTA-issued fare permit. The next meeting of the RTA CAB is on April 25th, 2025, or 28th, 2025, from 10 a.m. until noon. The RTA board will continue to receive quarterly updates after each meeting. I wanted to let you know that this will be my last presentation to you as I am leaving Kane County for another position. I'm sure our paths will still cross because I will be remaining in the transportation planning field in the region. Staff is working on filling the CAB chair position, and I'm sure you will have an update on that soon. I want to thank the RTA for giving me the opportunity to be part of the Citizens Advisory Board. I'm most proud of the work that was done to restructure the CAB. And bring rider members to the board. You've heard my updates, which include their voices on topics important to them. Having them share their everyday experiences as riders of transit is invaluable. The RTA staff is top-notch, as you are well aware, and I hope that I will continue to work with them in the future. As a transit advocate, I will be involved in this work, even if it is just as a regular citizen. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. And I want to thank you so much for your time and guidance. You've been just phenomenal as the CAB chairperson. You're not going to go away, but you know, you have just done yeoman's work, and we so deeply appreciate your leadership there. And you've also, Jackie's also successfully recruited new members to the Citizens Advisory Board, which is just so crucial. And expanding that membership of riders has just been extremely helpful to the staff of the RTA and to all of us. So Jackie, we wish you well. Thank you. You were manna from heaven and just did a tremendous job. And you're sort of the role model, is where you say, hey, be like her. But thank you so much. And please stay in touch, as I know you will. Yeah. Thank you. All right. 6B is Transit is the Answer. It's our update from Peter Kirsten, who will start the presentation, and other members of our team will come up and they can introduce themselves as, or Peter can, as he makes his opening remarks. Hi, Peter. Good morning.
Morning, Chairman Dillard, members of the RTA board. I'm Peter Kirsten, the manager of strategy and policy team. With me today are two here, and there will be more coming up. It's going to be like a line change this morning. So we'll just have folks introduce themselves as we go. Go ahead to the next slide. So before we jump into project updates, as alluded, wanted to provide the board with a brief update on an initiative that we're tracking in New York City. Jan 5 of this year, the New York Metropolitan Transportation Authority launched the congestion relief pricing zone for vehicles entering the busiest area of Manhattan. Yesterday, as was referenced, the US DOT sent a letter to New York State officials stating their intention to rescind approval of the congestion pricing pilot. Tolling any federally funded roadway requires FHWA approval. Many uncertainties will obviously continue to track, as this will likely result in some sort of legal action. But a little bit more about it. The pricing is dynamic by day and time period, as well as vehicle size. Pricing during the peak hours ranges from $9 for a private vehicle up to $21 for a large truck or tour bus. The CRZ includes all of the bridges and tunnels entering this part of Manhattan. Drivers do receive a credit based on the bridge or tunnel toll that they've already paid, as well as any surface streets entering the CRZ south of 60th Street. This excludes the West Side Highway, FDR Drive, and the Hugh L. Carey Tunnel as shown on the map at right. If you know your New York City geography, 60th Street is roughly the southern end of Central Park. So the CRZ includes Midtown all the way to the financial district, including many major institutions, job centers, visitor attractions. Planning for this project dates back to 2015, although ideas of a zone-based toll date back as far as the 1950s. There were some final hurdles to clear. Governor Hochul of New York paused the program as it was set to begin in 2024 and then ultimately lowered the toll price before beginning in January. The good news is that the early data returns on the CRZ have been widely heralded as a success across many measures. Daily vehicle entries into the CRZ are down 9%, so 9% fewer cars entering the zone. You may have seen some of the dramatic photos of quiet, free-flow streets in Midtown Manhattan. Travel times into the CRZ are down 10 to 30%. So folks that either need to drive or are willing to pay the toll for the convenience are perhaps seeing the biggest benefit. Fewer cars in the CRZ has reduced crashes by 70%. And transit ridership on New York subway and buses, as well as Metro North and the Long Island Railroad, all part of the MTA, have increased. Crime on the subway is down over the same time period, with the presence of more riders being attributed as a positive factor. Even Cranes New York has reported that foot traffic at local businesses has increased, assuaging fears of customers fleeing restaurants, venues, and other small businesses as a result of this policy. Lastly, the revenue generated by the CRZ will go towards transit capital improvement. Estimates are that the program will bring in as much as $500 million annually to the MTA. So again, we'll be sure to continue to provide updates to the board on the CRZ on this program. Want to clarify as well, this is one type of tolling. There are many types of tolling, but specifically cordon pricing programs of this scale require really significant federal, state, and local coordination, planning, and analysis, in this case for about 10 years before launch, with the idea existing well in advance of that. So for these reasons, we do not view congestion pricing as designed in New York to be a short or even midterm solution for our fiscal cliff, but obviously something to continue to pay attention to. Next slide. So moving to the project updates, the first up is the access pilot. Go ahead to the next slide. February marks the 1-year anniversary of the pilot. You'll remember that we began the pilot last year as Metro was going through a significant fare restructuring, reducing down to 4 zones, revamping all of their past products to better align with how riders are using the system today. The access pilot is also a key component of a commitment made in Transit is the Answer to make paying for transit more seamless and affordable. Next slide. So as a reminder, and for any new board members, the access pilot offers a reduced fare on Metra for any regional resident currently enrolled in the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, known as SNAP. The idea of the pilot was to offer a reduced fare based on income and to simplify the administrative burden both for people applying and for the RTA in managing the program. So SNAP eligibility is income-based, and the RTA can use a person's SNAP eligibility to offer the access permit. The pilot is for 18 months. It'll end in July of this year. The pilot is a partnership between RTA, Metra, and Cook County, with each contributing financially to the administrative cost and to the lost operations revenue. Year to date, the pilot has served more than 117,000 rides on all 11 Metra lines. There are more than 4,600 approved access permits, with the majority of those from Cook County. Next slide. Looking at the ride data by month on the left side of the screen, ridership grew throughout the summer and into the fall before seeing seasonal declines with holidays in November and December. On the right side, rides are shown by line on Metra. So it's noteworthy that the Metro Electric and Rock Island serve well over half of all of the access rides. This makes sense in that there are concentrations of SNAP households located within the service area of those lines on the south side of the city of Chicago and into South Suburban Cook County. This also dovetails nicely with the South Cook Fair Transit pilot, which preceded access but offered a universal reduced fare on those two Metro lines, as well as some transfer incentives with connecting PACE routes. Go ahead to the next slide. So the eligibility for the access pilot is handled through the Mobility Services Department. This is done alongside other RTA fare programs, including reduced fare and ride free. There are a few ways in which an individual can apply. They can apply in person or at one of the customer service sites by mail with a paper application that can be downloaded from the website as well. Getaccess.org is the website portal. 99% of applications that we have received are submitted through that portal, which is great to see. It's the most efficient way for us to handle these. The only challenge that we've really had with the application process is that customers have some difficulty providing the correct documentation that they're currently enrolled in SNAP. To help with this problem, the Mobility Services Group has made enhancements to the online fare program portal to kind of connect people directly to the SNAP website, where they can get what they need to show us, the correct record, in order for us to approve their eligibility. So that's helped with improving this problem. Michael's group, Mobility Service, is also in discussions with how we can keep improving the process. Additionally, in partnership with Metro and Cook County, we've promoted the program in a number of different ways with paid advertising, direct text messages on SNAP recipients, and an in-vehicle promotion on Metro. You've likely seen the access ads if you've ridden Metro in the last year. To break down again on eligibility, there's about 4,600 customers. 75% of those are in Cook County. I think 6% are in DePage, 5% in Lake, 4% in Kane, and 2% of the total group are in McHenry. Go ahead to the next slide. So in terms of next step, the discussion has begun on the future of the pilot. RTA, Metro, and Cook County have all voiced support for continuing access. Additionally, full funding of existing fare programs along with ADA paratransit continues to be a critical element of the RTA legislative agenda. Funding of these critical programs would go a long ways towards solving the fiscal cliff. Lastly, we know that expansion would broadly increase the impact of the program. So we're seeing strong ridership along the Electric and Rock Island lines, but we know that there are SNAP households in concentrations throughout the region, through the west side of the city and into Western Cook, into the collar counties, particularly along some of the satellite cities in our region, such as Joliet, Aurora, Elgin, and Waukegan. Expanding access to include CTA, to include PACE, would make transit affordable for so many more low-income households. So we'll be happy to continue to report back as progress is made. And I'll pause here for any questions on either the first item, congestion pricing, or access before going to the next projects.
Any questions or comments? Director Yonan.
No, thank you. I think this is really great. Again, with all the discussions of, being at the table here with the fiscal cliff, there's such a great story to tell with this pilot. When you look at the ways that we have such a set group of ridership that's out there, a captive one that, again, we want to obviously grow the program, but when you have the story to tell about those that really do rely on this and are able to to really see, the way government should work, is to identify the need and then being able to do something about it. I just hope we're, able to take, again, this isn't a big number, but the story of what this tells, to the legislatures, be able to kind of, get them to see how something like this needs to receive that sustainable funding. So thank you, Chairman.
Amen. I mean, that was a point I was going to make, and it's also shows that we're innovative, and we have a list of many innovative things we've done from COVID on. So great program. It's worked well, and we will definitely sing it to the legislature to show them, we get where they want us to go. On congestion pricing, two things that jumped out at me. Number one is crime's down, and it's just doesn't have to do with congestion pricing, but the more riders there are, it's a very weird but understandable phenomenon. Is the more riders you have, crime goes down. It's just something that is out there, and that proves that the more riders, crime subsides. The second one is, and it's one that I always talk about. I always try to tell our non-riders the benefits of mass transit, and it's why, as we're known as public transportation, that everyone in society should support mass transit. Crashes or accidents were down 70%. And there are statistics that we used to get from Allstate and State Farm that when we have a couple of million riders a day, this is pre-pandemic, but we still have 1.2 million riders a day, is that everyone's insurance rates, auto insurance rates, are lower because there's 1 million+ people on mass transit every day. And the more cars you have out there in a more congested fashion, the more accidents you have, so your insurance rates go up. So whether you ever get near mass transit or not, your automobile insurance rates, and yes, we all kind of, gaze our eyes at, increasing insurance costs, but they'd even go up more if we didn't have mass transit. And I just always like to point out that even if you don't use it and you buy auto insurance, you benefit from mass transit because your rate's going to be lower just because there are fewer crashes, and the congestion tax shows. I mean, that number is astronomical. 70% fewer collisions from 60th Street South. So that's just one more reason that everyone in the state needs to support mass transit. Any other questions or comments? Peter, great report. Thank you. I'm sorry, Dr. Mondero.
Thanks, and great report, Peter. Not a question directly regarding your presentation, but I'm just curious. I saw an article, I don't know if it was in Cranes or the Tribune, about Cameo, that local company, and they are mandating their employees return to work 4 out of 5 days a week. Fridays can be work from home. But what I thought was interesting in the article, well, they're going to give everyone a $10,000 raise for those who come back to work in the office. But apart from that, they were offering free parking for all their employees. And what struck me was that they didn't say, and offering free public transit, like access to free Metro and free CTA, free PACE. And I'm wondering, I know that there is the pre-tax reimbursement that the RTA has, but is there a program where we can work with employers to be like, hey, give your employees free Metro, free CTA, and there's something that will entice employers to do that for all employees in their company on a larger scale like that? And I'm just wondering if there is, and if so, or how can we capitalize on that more?
Yeah, I don't think we have the transit benefit program. There was also a law passed for employers of a certain size within the service area have to offer that. Specifics of how exactly that's offered, I think, are flexible. Kevin, you might be able to answer more directly if any of the current customers have used that system.
So I'm Kevin Stansell. I'm Division Manager, Regional Coordination, and I'm over the Transit Benefit Program here. And as Peter said, the state legislation did help increase the program. We're not back to the numbers before the pandemic, but we do reach out to the companies within the legislation that does that. And I might add that most of the transit benefit is actually, and I'm sorry to take, I'll just briefly say that just to make clear of RTA, we handle smaller companies. And I've read that article too. I don't know if Camille was small enough that we would have reached out to them. But the thought is that if you promote the transit benefits, then that is something that companies will at least look for. And the extra $10,000 would help that. We do not know most of the overall numbers for transit benefit because most of them are done through bigger companies. So we do communicate with them, but they don't share the numbers with us. But it's something that does help, and I have to emphasize the legislation did help for companies like that. So that extra $10,000, if we reached out to them or their own companies, the benefit is just good as it is.
So but the transit benefit is only for reduced fare pre-tax, right? Or is there,
No,
is there a free, completely free access?
So what we can offer is that the IRS allows the amount of money someone puts out of their paycheck directly to get the RTA debit card or the bigger WageWorks, kind of now called health equity, as a benefit. So, but how the employer chooses to do it is something that's up to them. So they could technically put transit value in every account. So they could pay for their employees' transit. But we can't really control which route they choose, whether they offer it to employees to take it out of their paychecks or fully fund transit. Some do partial. They'll be like, we'll match dollar to dollar. So there are lots of ways of doing it. One comparable program I'll mention is UPass, the University Pass program at CTA that Metra is piloting at UIC, a joint version with CTA. Has been very successful because even if it's on students' tuition, it's sort of you enter the program and you feel you have unlimited access to transit at a very low cost. So we have looked at models like that that have been really successful for people who are taking transit and are not sort of on a full income when they are students and can take advantage of programs like that, which are very successful.
Malik, before I get off there, could you get me the numbers for the UIC, both Metra and CTA? I would love to have those numbers as just another example of why transit's so critical to that university, a great university. Director Quinteric.
On the transit benefit, I think, Leanne, you have a leadership position at APTA. The Congress is going to be doing probably one of the biggest tax reconciliation bills, maybe an opportunity to, partner with U.S. Chamber and look at the tax benefit and other incentives for employers to provide a full benefit, not just the pre-tax. Also issues of rideshare and other transit incentives. It's going to be a very large tax package. And so figuring out from a national perspective a way to incentivize transit better than what we have today could be a good discussion. The second piece on the value pricing pilot for congestion, I believe Illinois used to or still may have a slot in the same program that New York used for congestion pricing, which was the US DOT letter rescinded approval from New York to participate in that pilot program. I don't know if we're investigating or thinking about using that pilot program, but it's something to probably look into. The third thing that you brought up was just seconding the chairman's conversation about congestion relief benefits for transit. As you think about the ordinance from last month and putting together the sort of consequences of falling off the cliff, to the extent that there's modeling and we can quantify the congestion, problems of reducing service, I think that that's a good part of the narrative that we're going to have to tell the public and the General Assembly. And for the flip side of the coin, if we invest more, what could be the congestion relief benefits, so that for those that don't use transit every day or might have to drive, to also understand that they're going to benefit from an experience if we do this right.
And it's interesting, Tom. when I first got here, we had the transit benefit program and the tax issues before the Congress. And I remember I wouldn't say fighting, that's maybe not the right word, but we were clearly watching what the Congress was doing with increasing those kinds of benefits for parking versus mass transit. And I remember former Congressman Peter Roscom was a member of the Ways and Means Committee, sitting down with him saying, hey, you got to balance this. We need this benefit for transit, and you can't be giving bigger benefits for parking because that upsets the apple cart with respect to traffic congestion. So, yeah, the parking folks were in there, after we were finished with them, the parking people, the owners, were coming in going, transit doesn't need any more, give it to us. But it's a great benefit, and it benefits employers. That was our message to some of the more conservative members of Congress is, hey, the employer gets benefits here too. And it's a great program. It works. Beat up my law firm to make sure, we do that. But it's a wonderful benefit, and it really holds down the cost for, everyday riders of our system. It's a tremendous, tremendous program that works. Any other questions of Peter before we move on?
All right, I think we need the next slide. All right, good morning. I'm Heather Mullins with the Local Planning and Program Management Group here at the RTA, and I'm going to provide an overview of the Transit-Friendly Communities Guide that we recently completed. Next slide. So a little bit of background on why we created this guide. This is an implementation action from Transit is the Answer, which called for a transit-friendly communities policy to set standards for communities that host transit services to support and encourage land use decisions that improve access to transit to ensure that our riders can travel safely and efficiently. This is also an update to a similar guide that we created in 2012, but the new guide reflects some changes in mobility, development markets, such as a new focus on equitable TOD or ETOD, new micro-mobility options, such as the bike shares and scooter shares that we see out there now, and issues with housing availability and affordability that we see as well. We wanted a guide to support, encourage, and also educate land use decision makers on ways to make their communities more transit friendly and identify barriers, opportunities, but also strategies to make transit friendly development in communities. Next slide. So we convened a steering committee consisting of representatives from municipal and county governments, all three of our service boards, nonprofit and advocacy organizations, and developers to provide feedback on the project development and our deliverables. We also conducted focus groups with expanded participation from each of those groups to gain more detailed insight as we created the content of the slide, of the guide. Next slide, sorry. The final guide consists of 9 separate chapters as well as an executive summary. The chapters cover topics such as transit-friendly land use design concepts, a discussion on land use and market trends and demographics and how they are impacting communities and how ETOD can provide solutions, strategies on how to effectively and equitably engage your community members in ETOD and transit-friendly design so that we ensure that everyone's opinions are heard in the process, a toolkit of land use and transportation strategies and best practices, access infrastructure design concepts that prioritize pedestrian and bicycle access to transit, an implementation checklist to help communities start the process of implementing the policies, programs, and techniques that are discussed in the guide. We also developed 10 case studies from the Chicago area as well as nationally to help illustrate best practices and lessons learned on transit-friendly policies. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to cover just some of the content of the guide. So next slide. So in the land use and market trends chapter, we included a matrix that outlined the different residential density levels for optimum support for various transit options. This is to help communities that host these types of transit service understand the density levels that they should ideally target within a quarter to a half mile of their stop or transit station, to help support the transit service. So for example, on this slide, a community with PACE fixed route bus should target about 8 to 12 dwelling units per acre. That can consist of a mix of attached or detached single-family uses. A community with a metro rail station should target a minimum of 10 dwelling units per acre. Some areas of the region can support higher densities, such as stations in the city of Chicago or in already established suburban downtowns. We also developed recommended density levels to support PACE pulse routes, bus rapid transit, and CTA rail service. They're not shown on here. That's on another page. Every community is different. Some areas already have higher densities. Some may have market limitations to achieve some of these densities, but we do believe that all communities should consider these numbers in their land use planning. Next slide. As part of the same chapter, we also conducted an additional analysis of existing densities in the region to help us understand what communities or rail station areas are meeting these density targets. So we found that transit services in our region are largely operating in communities with less than optimal land use densities. Meeting these density targets can help increase ridership, can address housing shortages and affordability, and address transportation climate resilience throughout the region. So the map on the left here depicts a CTA rail station dwelling units per acres. That's how many homes are within a quarter mile of the station. The larger and brighter yellow the circle, the lower the density and the greater the opportunity to develop more transit supportive communities. The map on the right depicts the same for metro station areas throughout the region. Again, the brighter the yellow, the lower the density. So none of these stations that have the bright yellow circles are meeting the recommended density targets, which is a minimum of 10 dwelling units per acre. So based on our analysis, we believe that promoting ETOD throughout the region could yield more than 250,000 additional residential units accessible by transit in our region, and that's a conservative estimate. Next slide. So this guide is available on the RTA website, and we are hosting a webinar on March 4th at noon to provide an overview of the guide, and we'll also hear from a few municipal representatives on how the guide can be useful in their communities. An outcome of this guide was for the RTA to investigate the potential for a joint development program for our transit agencies. So the RTA is leading, in partnership with CTA, Metro, and PACE, a joint development study to help determine if perhaps a more robust approach to joint development and TOD would be beneficial to our region. Joint development is a form of value capture that allows a transit agency to capture some of the economic value created by the transit system and use those funds to support the transit system's operations. It's a tool to meet ETOD goals such as affordable housing or ridership increases. Joint development can be pursued by partnering with private entities through property sales, ground leases, air rights, or rent concessions. While joint development has not been prominent pursuit in the RTA's legacy transit system, it is an approach we've seen in a lot of younger transit agencies. And so we'll also delve into their programs and find some lessons learned there. It'll be a two-phase approach. First, to determine if a joint development program should be pursued in our region. And then if so, we'll go ahead and design what the program may look like. We want to make sure it makes sense in our region, if there's enough developable land, and what the cost benefit outcomes are. Procurement is underway and we expect to start work by May. So we'll provide updates on that process as it progresses. Next slide. That's the end of my presentation, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions of Heather? Thank you very much.
Chairman, Dr. Gathing has joined
Oh,
the meeting.
Dr. Gathing, good morning. Jamie?
Good morning.
We're just letting you know she just joined.
Oh,
She didn't have a question.
joined,
She was
okay.
joining the meeting. She was a new addition. to
Good
the-
morning. Make sure she's on the roll as you I'm sure have. Good morning, Director. Thank you for joining us. Kevin, good morning.
Thank you, Chairman. Next slide, please. Good morning, directors. Again, I'm Kevin Stansel. I'm the Division Manager of Regional Coordination Group. I'm providing an update on our project, the Travel Information Review Study, which is nearing completion. Next slide, please. Being the division manager of regional coordination, in my division, we work hand in hand with CTA, Metra, and PACE on a variety of programs. I oversee the interagency signage program, where we install and maintain signage to better connect Metra, CTA, and PACE. We have over 1,200 signs at 27 locations. We help design and distribute the RTA paper maps, which the RTA has done since 1976. We also hold quarterly service coordination and real-time transit feed meetings with the service boards. I also oversee the RTA Transit Benefit Program, which we just talked about, in which I mentioned earlier that the participation increased with the recent state legislation. And finally, we manage a $40 million federal grant for transit signal priority, where we work with CTA, PACE, and the Chicago Department of Transportation to implement TSP. Under the grant, CTA has implemented TSP in 2 corridors, and PACE has implemented TSP in 6 corridors. Next slide, please. One of the action items from the Transit is the Answer strategic plan is to provide more accurate real-time information for transit riders. Stakeholder working groups made clear that communication improvements were needed before, during, and at the end of trips. In February 2024, staff utilized an existing task order to engage a consultant team led by H&TB to conduct a thorough review and assessment of all information provided to riders throughout the region, with a particular focus on real-time information. This travel information for riders study identified ways to improve customer information provided during a transit trip in the Chicago region on CTA, Metra, and PACE. For our regional transit system to work seamlessly, information must be consistent across the service boards. Customers riding each service board should feel comfortable using other service board services in terms of information provided at the station, on buses and trains, on signage identifying services, and via audio, video, visual information. Next slide, please. Our work for the Travel Information Review Study included 6 tasks. Review customer information changes since a 2005 RTA research, a steering committee engagement, inventory and quantification of customer information, the user experience testing, identify coordination opportunities, and finally, develop an action plan. I'll briefly go over a couple of tasks in the following slides. Next slide, please. Inventory and quantification of customer information. On this task, we worked with Metra, CTA, and PACE staff to conduct an inventory of all customer-facing information. Here are some examples with photos showing a CTA bus exterior display, a PACE bus tracker sign, a CTA Braille bus stop sign, and a Metra tracker sign. Next slide, please. The consultant team then conducted user experience testing with a diverse group of recruited riders to learn how things are working in the real world. The team analyzed and summarized the experiences and interview responses from the user testing experience. Key findings of user testing helped inform our recommendations in the Coordination Opportunities Report. This map shows the trips of the riders who participated in our user experience testing, which also included trips not to downtown Chicago. Next slide, please. With all this information, RTA staff and the consultant team then identified coordination opportunities, which we fleshed out with the service boards and then presented to the steering committee, who provided feedback. These coordination opportunities are: develop a standard means of information reporting using the General Transit Feed Specification, that's GTFS as most people call it, improve delivery of service alerts, expand the utility of dynamic signage at stations and on transit vehicles, refine communication strategies around special events, improve interagency signage for clarity and accessibility, improve dynamic audio and visual announcements at stations and in transit vehicles, and finally, standardize and improve support for multiple languages. I'll briefly address a couple of these opportunities. Next slide, please. Expanding the utility of dynamic signage at stations in transit vehicle and on transit vehicles. This looks at better ways to utilize the capital investments that Metra, CTA, and PACE are already providing. Expanding the use of dynamic signs and facility transfers, this would provide real-time information for connecting services on vehicle dynamic displays. It would show all services available at transfer locations and on dynamic signage as appropriate. With the shared display terminals, this would determine a standard for showing different services on a single screen. For example, on this Metro bus tracker screen at Ravenswood, it would show the CTA Lawrence bus, which operates right in front of the station. The other pictures on here are on the top right. That is that's the display inside a newer CTA Nova bus. And the bottom one is an interior display of the newer CTA 7000 rail cars. Next slide, please. Improve signage for clarity and accessibility. We have started to work through this with our interagency signage program with CTA, PACE, and Metra. Incorporate bus stop identification letters in displays provided to customers. This information connects physical locations of bus stops to what customers see on their mobile devices. RTA, CTA, and PACE have increasingly used letters to denote bus stops at transfer locations. This was actually based on the RTA's interagency signage work 10 years ago. The other recommendation here is to continue replacement of Metra station platform signs to show the end-of-line destinations. Metra previously and currently they use to Chicago and from Chicago for on signage. This would replace this to improve clarity for users whose native language is not English and for users unfamiliar with the Metra operating procedures. For instance, those of you that take the UP know that the trains operate the opposite tracks as they would in Europe, which is confusing for many riders who are infrequent Metra riders. This example, actually, for this one, shows the new Peterson Ridge, the signage of the new Peterson Ridge station, which has the northbound going to Kenosha, versus the Ravenswood station, the one this is just south of it, which just says from Chicago. Next slide, please. The next step in this process is to develop an action plan with specific tasks for RTA and the service boards to implement the recommendations. That work is currently underway, and we expect to have an action plan completed sometime next month. With that, that concludes my presentation, and I welcome any comments or questions.
Comments? Yes, Director Colson.
I think service board coordination is way overdue on the signage, and I applaud you for doing that. But I have a question that I get a lot of feedback where I live in Glenview, and I think it applies to like Joliet and Naperville. They see a lot of Amtrak trains stopping there too. Is there any way you could work with Amtrak? Maybe they'll even pay part of the cost to list the Amtrak trains, because it's very confusing to people I know in Glenview, and I assume in Joliet and Naperville.
Director, so we do at those stations, at the Joliet station, we do list the actual Amtrak on the schedule. So when we have interagency signage at locations with Amtrak, we do list it's there. I do not think we do schedules. We do schedules only at Joliet and Davis Street from pilot locations from 10 years ago. Once we worked out with Metra, we don't do the schedules after that. We can actually bring that up to Metra since we have set that example of having that information. But I will say, looking at some of the stations like Naperville, they do list it. But getting to your point, we will bring it up to Metra about see if we can incorporate announcements, because I do think you're correct. I mean, it would be very clear if you see an Amtrak, infrequent riders may not know the difference between an Amtrak train and a Metra train.
No, they don't, and they get on the wrong train sometimes at Glenview.
So we will bring that up. And in our work with Metra, they are rolling out, as you know, the actual Metra tracker. They're trying to get that in all the stations across the system. And for those of you that are lucky enough to have that in your stations already, you understand of how great that is to have as a Metra customer, with it announces when the train's coming and it gives you the countdown clocks there too.
And can I make one statement to Jim Derwinski or anybody from Metra in the room? I don't know why you call the Milwaukee District North Line the Milwaukee District North Line, because it does not go to Milwaukee, and that confuses people at Glenview. You ought to call it the Fox Lake Line or something.
Director, one of the things in my division that we coordinate with the service boards is we work hand in hand with them on signage. And in Metro, we work much more than CTA. Not because, it's just because Metro is looking to integrate more with us. I mean, not saying the CTA has a great signage program. I have to come clear, I was over it about 15 years ago, but Metro's working with us. They do understand that's a issue. We're working in part with them on their system signage, and we were actually at an open house briefing they had back in December. They are very clear that is a problem with customers.
It's really confusing. Director Rondero.
Kevin, you were a pleasure to work with at CTA many years ago. But just to reaffirm what Director Colson just mentioned and what I brought up at a prior RTA board meeting, like any work that in coordination you could do, like at Union Station, for example, like the lack of Metro signage and CTA signage within Union Station. I know it's not owned by Metro, but also O'Hare Airport, right? Like having more like signage of all Metro pace at O'Hare and at Midway, I think it would also be helpful in your efforts. But great job.
Thank you, Director Montero. These are all the questions. I haven't been to the board for a while, so bear with me. At Union Station back in 2017, we worked with CTA Pace, CTA Metro, and Pace was with us. The RTA installed the signage that you see at Union Station. Before that, there was no mention of Metro, no mention of CTA. I was just looking at Instagram that CTA posted yesterday of where they show you how to get from Metro to CTA using the signage that we installed that mentions CTA on the signs up to the actual street level at the Union Station Transit Center, which has a letter C. CTA put that in. As I said, we're all doing that, and it lists that. So we have worked with them. We are working with Metro to try to see when the renovation is done there, if the signage will continue to point out where to catch CTA buses and which Metro lines to go. Because when we installed that signage back in 2017, we were shocked with Metro, we were all shocked that they let us put on that signage what Metro service there was. So it does, besides just the north terminals and the south. So we have worked with them, but things have changed at Amtrak. We all know Metro and Amtrak get along somewhat at Union Station, but that is on the list. And again, I'm sure Metro will address that with their system-wide signage too, in working in coordination with Amtrak. Oh, O'Hare, I'm sorry, and I forgot, O'Hare. At O'Hare, we have worked, CTA is always in discussions with the Department of Aviation on how to promote public transit there. There is some signage there. CTA was promoting it about a year ago of an easier way to get from the terminals to the Blue Line. I will admit there does need to be more signage, and we'll talk with them to promote going to the transit center, rather the parking lot at the end of the People Mover, where you would catch the North Central and also the Pace Pulse. And we do work with Pace there. We actually do the electronic signage for Pace. We do the artwork for the electronic signage for Pace at O'Hare for the Pulse.
Yeah, maybe another one to add to your list for the conversation with Metro on the UP West line. And I think maybe it's because we share with freight. You really can't tell. There's kind of static signage that says north platform between these times and south platform between these lines. But that's kind of a roll of the dice. And so I can tell you a number of times where you see people scrambling, trying to get from platform A under the, through the tunnel to get to platform B. So real-time updates, audible or real-time visual sides that say, be on this platform, for the incoming train would be fantastic.
Director Grovan, that was, as part of this Transit is the Answer, with our work with this, we now have, monthly meetings with Metra, CTA, and PACE on this project alone. It's somewhat a different group than our real-time transit feed. There's some overlap. That was actually a topic we discussed last week with Metra, of that, again, they understand that, and we asked, that was one of the things in this that came up in that the uncertainty of customers of which platform to get on when they get the notice to do that. And Metra's concern is that they have to actually get the technology in place, which they're close for that, but then also they need to have enough time so that customers could do that. If, for instance, if they were to do this within like 30 seconds, people would go nuts and try to run across tracks and the like. So it is on their radar for that.
And I think a lot of that you're hearing is a lot of these things are beyond one entity's control, right? On the UP, it's actually the UP that's just sort of controlling the information that gets to Metra. And so they're, challenged with some of sharing that information. They don't always own and or operate services within those tracks. So that's part of the challenge that the region faces. And I think that's why we, RTA, 15 plus years ago, embarked on this effort to try to coordinate interagency signage, and now it's sort of evolving into this digital space. It's going to be an ongoing effort because it's either physical infrastructure that they don't own or operate, information that they don't necessarily directly have control of, and so they're just things that we keep working on. And we, RTA, have always taken that sort of regional approach and sort of pushed all three of them to think more holistically and more regionally about how that all gets integrated. But I will say that, and Director Colson has been watching this for a long, long time. We've made a lot of progress. Unfortunately, the work is never done, and it will continue to just be stuff we have to keep working on. So.
Director Corbett, I'm glad you brought that up. I had a mom grab me on Saturday who talked about, changing platforms at the last minute and how dangerous it was. She had teenagers who were there, and it's very confusing. And if it's a real short window, they will cross the tracks in ways they should not. So it's a real problem.
All right. We can move
Hi,
to the next
Tina.
slide.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning. My name's Tina Fassett-Smith. Next slide, please. Thanks. That's perfect. I'm the Director of Communications, and I'm going to cover our most recent coalition meeting and the work we're doing to prepare for an upcoming advocacy campaign. So next slide, please. On Tuesday, February 11th, we held our 6th quarterly Transit is the Answer coalition meeting. As a reminder, the coalition is a group that grew out of the working groups that helped us develop Transit is the Answer, and it's designed to provide feedback on implementation of the plan. This meeting marked our most successful recruitment to date with 400 registrants, half of which had never engaged with us prior. We had 200 attendees at the actual meeting. That's a level of attrition that's normal for a free event. And it's important to remember that when people sign up for the coalition, they're automatically being added to our email list. So just getting people to register is a key way that we grow our audience. I just want to pause for a second and note that we've had more than 1,400 stakeholders register for and attend our events in 2024 and early 2025. That includes things like webinars and summits. And it's this kind of engagement that is the main way we've grown our Regional Transit Update newsletter, because people have to register with their emails. And we've grown that newsletter mailing group by 50% over the last 13 months. The coalition meeting drew key legislators and elected officials, and I know several of you were in attendance. The meeting included an overview of transforming transit and a Q&A session led by Leanne, Communications Manager Melissa Meyer, and Government Affairs Principal Kyle Whitehead. During the meeting, we used a tool called Mentimeter to help gauge reaction to the vision we presented. On average, 7 out of 10 respondents said transforming transit aligned with their vision and priorities and would make the system more accountable and reliable. Attendees were also asked what was missing from the vision. Answers included specificity on implementation, funding options, full consolidation, and greater cost efficiencies. The meeting concluded with breakout sessions with about 20 participants per group facilitated by RTA staff. We took careful notes in each session, and we ended up with about 30 questions from attendees that we were not able to respond to during the meeting. Today or early tomorrow morning, a recap blog will be published on our website that includes the responses to all of our questions, all of the questions we received, along with a recording of the meeting. These will be included in our newsletter that will go out tomorrow, as well as on our social channels in the coming days. I'm happy to take any questions about the coalition meeting before I briefly touch on the work we're doing to prepare for an advocacy campaign this spring.
Any questions? I know I was on there and a couple of you were too, and it's great stuff. Leanne does a great job, as all of you do, updating folks on that. And it builds our mailing list, which is also helpful.
All right, you can go on to the next slide. So every year since 2022, we've developed and implemented advocacy campaigns that promote transit, and we plan to do so this year as well. We've long known that any campaign we did this year would be focused on specific legislative action, whereas previous campaigns have been to raise awareness and generally advocate for transit. Planning to date for this paid public advertising campaign has included obtaining the services of multiple vendors with deep experience in advertising and media strategy and planning. We've also run several small campaigns, for instance, to promote the launch of Transforming Transit, to test messages and tactics. In December and January, we organized 2 focus groups, one of suburban riders and non-riders, and one of riders and residents who live in the city of Chicago and Cook County. These 2 separate groups provided invaluable insights into the level of awareness of the issues facing transit, attitudes about the system today, and what messages, if any, persuade people to support increased funding for the system. As we expected, awareness and responses varied widely by geography and other demographic factors. For instance, suburban residents were less aware of the fiscal cliff and more likely to say that cost was a barrier to riding than residents of the city and Cook County, who were more aware of fiscal challenges and saw safety and cleanliness as barriers to riding. We will use this information to geographically target advertising to ensure we're using our dollars as efficiently as possible. We were also able to test messages in support of increased funding, and we're happy to see that increased frequency was a winning message across all groups. Likewise, when looking at messages that spurred action, we found that messages that focus on how service cuts would impact quality of life, particularly around increased congestion, this was more likely to resonate with people than messages around economic or environmental impacts. So our next step is to finalize the most complex pieces of the campaign, which will be 30-second broadcast ads, and from those develop shorter versions for streaming, broadcast, social, print, digital, out of home. These ads will have a call to action that specifically asks people to contact their legislators. So timing this to the right moment in the legislative calendar will be key to ensure we have a maximum impact. We'll come back to the board with more on the campaign as it's developed, and I'm happy to take any questions before Rob provides a legislative update.
Any questions? Rob, it's all yours. Thanks, Tina.
Thank you. I'm Rob Nash, Director of Government Affairs, and I'm going to cover some state legislative updates, including the governor's budget address yesterday and next steps on transforming transit, as well as some other notable information on the opening weeks of the legislative session. If you could go to the next slide. Thanks. Yesterday, Governor Pritzker delivered the joint address on the state of the state and budget for fiscal year 2026, which highlights the governor's spending priorities for this upcoming year. The state recently revised its fiscal and revenue outlook, and guidance improved, moving from a projected $3 billion deficit to a small projected surplus of approximately $200 million in the state's budget. While the governor's budget did not address the transit funding for the fiscal cliff, it did include an additional $2.1 million for free and reduced fares and an additional $1 million for ADA paratransit. We're pleased with those increases, but just for some context, we pegged the cost of those 2 programs together at around $400 million, and even with these increases, we're just slightly over $30 million in state support for these 2 critical programs. Though we're still awaiting full legislative language on the budget, we do anticipate general appropriation levels similar to previous state budgets. Essentially, we'll have to see what the PTF match comes down to, but we believe it's in line with projections on our sales tax collections. As we have emphasized repeatedly, this legislative session is critical for transit as we need to secure additional funding to address the fiscal cliff now to avoid drastic actions to balance the budgets in 2026. The governor's budget sets the stage for that conversation, but we have a lot of work to do before the legislature adjourns in May. As a reminder, we are currently developing legislative language that reflects the priorities featured in the vision, Transforming Transit, and we are projected to share that language with leaders in the House and Senate and this board as they consider legislation to address the fiscal cliff. Final schedules for hearings have not been confirmed, but we believe there are likely to be multiple subject matter hearings before the Senate Transportation Committee, and the House Working Group on Transit continues to hold discussions on that side of the chamber of the Capitol. Next week, the RTA and service boards will be testifying at our annual House Appropriations hearing, and we do anticipate a more robust discussion of the overall fiscal cliff, reforms, and potential funding scenarios in that hearing. I learned yesterday that in addition to the Appropriations Committee, the regular House Transportation Committee will be joining that hearing, so it'll be a joint discussion, as I mentioned, on I think a more comprehensive approach to the fiscal cliff and not just the narrow discussion usually held about the annual appropriations. Finally, just a general couple updates on the session. More than 6,300 bills have been filed, including a number of proposals that affect or could affect transit and transit funding in the region. But most of these proposals are very similar to other bills we have engaged with over the years, and many focus on expansion of free and reduced fares programs for different populations in the state. I'll close with a discussion in a little bit more detail about the Labor Alliance for Public Transportation. A broad coalition of individual labor unions filed the transit governance proposal, which made a number of changes to the appointment structure for RTA, CTA, Metra, and PACE, while maintaining the supermajority. And the proposal also included reforms to fare setting policies, ways to identify and implement service standards, and some proposals for greater law enforcement presence and transit ambassadors on the system. I will note that I think the labor proposal is generally aligned with the approach in that it grants the RTA more authority over fares and service standards and boosts accountability in order to ensure more frequent and reliable service is delivered with new funding, and that's good. But while there's directional alignment with much of the labor proposal, we remain engaged in discussions with the coalition to address some of the differences in our approaches and continue to work to develop a comprehensive approach on the legislation. I'm happy to answer any questions on that. I'm assuming there's a larger discussion to be had, but I think I'm watching the calendar closely because it is quickly turning pages, but I do think there is emerging consensus on at least the broad buckets of what needs to get done. I know that may sound like a incremental increase or advance, but it actually is an important, I think, turning point. And we're getting down to the, I think, more detailed conversation that we need to get to in Springfield.
Dr. Sutter.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Rob. Appreciate the report. First, I'm extremely pleased and quite impressed with the efforts that have been taken by staff and the joint collaborative approach by our service agencies. I think the reports today were exceptional. I wish that every member of the General Assembly could sit here and listen to these reports and the efforts that have been made. So I'm very grateful for that, and I trust that we'll be using that to greater extent as we go to the legislature this spring. Second thing is I'm incredibly grateful to the service agency boards for their response to our resolution of last month. I think that speaks well for them, and I believe that helps us as we continue to move forward. Rob just indicated there's something like 6,300 bills that have been produced for the legislature's consideration in this session. There's a lot of activity going on down there, and McHenry County Council of Governments was there just 2 weeks ago as a lobbying effort, and appreciate the opportunity to visit with Rob as we were down there. We are fortunate in McHenry County to have two things. First, we are very, very aligned in terms of our priorities. And secondly, we have a strongly collaborative approach as we work together to move things forward. So in our efforts down there 2 weeks ago, we focused on two things primarily. Frankly, of secondary concern for us was LGDF funding distributions and our concern about the possible reduction of those. We want to see those maintained. But the second thing, of course, was our transit system and our need for greater funding. So we upheld these primary goals. The first was to see that we had a 1.5 billion annual investment in transit for the future from the state legislature. We asked for their understanding that we support a sustainable revenue mix, including an increase in the RTA sales tax, a vehicles mileage tax, and a tollway tax, among others. And the import of that was for us as elected officials in our county to be able to say that we will support increased sustainable revenue in order to be able to support this 1.5 investment, 1.5 billion investment in transit. That we will work as elected officials to communicate the need, to communicate the significance of the revenue for those improvements in our transit system. And I think the legislators appreciated that level of collaborative effort. The other thing that we indicated was the support for maintenance of the service agency boards themselves. And then finally, support for an enhanced reconfigured RTA board with greater authority over the service agencies with regards to fares and service standards. So we worked hard to communicate that to many individuals, including the leadership of the General Assembly. With regards to the governance by RTA, we feel firmly, and has been stated by Rob and others, that we need to have a balanced, expanded representation on the RTA board, and further that we believe that it was absolutely essential from our perspective to maintain the supermajority voting requirement. We are pleased with the efforts that are going forward in terms of the many bills that have been related to transit, and most notably the Labor Alliance bill that has been filed. We believe that we are aligned with many of the elements of that bill and others, and we just hope that we can work jointly with the authors of these various bills to kind of move our priorities forward. As I expressed before, I believe that it's appropriate for this body to pass a second resolution which would identify similar points of import with regards to the governance structure. And I think that it's necessary for us to move forward in a pretty timely manner to put that out. But I think things are starting to gel. I think we need to get behind it. We need to be a leader in that. And so I would suggest that we consider a resolution with regards to governance structure. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Rob and I also, Dr. Sagar, we went to the DuPage Mayors and Managers annual dinner, which was great. Cranes had a very nice op-ed in the last 10 days or so saying move most of the governance changes to the RTA, which was very positive as well. And you know, at some point in time, we will pass a resolution, you know, really saying what we think on governance. So, but things, Rob, you and your team are doing a great job. Enjoy Springfield. I'll be down there, and be down Wednesday for the hearing. I did speak, Dr. Sagar, at Maggiano's a couple of weeks ago to the umbrella group of some of the larger employers, their government affairs people, including United Airlines, which I always say, how do you think your people get to work at United Airlines at O'Hare? They take the Blue Line or they take Pulse. You know, trying to give a dose of reality to the representatives for the larger employers, so their governmental affairs people can when they're talking to the executives at their employers or companies, you know, have our perspective on the value of transit and where we're going and why the changes ought to come to a more strengthened RTA and explain to them, like the DuPage mayors and managers, Rob noted that the MMA essentially dilutes suburban representation by 50% in the transit discussions. And so we're out there working it hard. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the fact that we're anticipating a resolution. I think that's very, very important. I guess my next question is, what's the timeline on that?
We can say together, March.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Perfect. Thank you very much.
thank you. Director Ryan.
Thank you, Chairman. So I just want to give a little bit of context around the labor bill, since that's where I come from. So the group is comprised of the Chicago Federation of Labor as well as the Illinois AFL-CIO, which ensures that there's representation in Chicago, Cook County, but as well as across all the collar counties. And I think it's important to point out that it is it's the product of 30 local unions that represent 15,000 workers across all three of these systems. So it's like they've put a lot of time and energy into it. The bill addresses the shortcomings and critical needs while providing support and structure for an improved transit system. So there's a lot of time and energy that's gone into this. It's been very well received by a lot of different groups. And so I know we've talked about this before, but I would just, again say I think it's worth RTA getting together with labor to kind of talk about the places, that there might be some differences, and I'm happy to help facilitate any of those meetings. And I also would invite others to, if anyone has any questions or wants to learn any more, I'm more than happy to help facilitate that. So, thank you.
Thank you. No, you can be really valuable here. And, Rob, you can disagree with me if you want, but, I consider organized labor an ally in this quest.
I will not disagree with you. I did not get into the weeds, but to your point, we've had some great conversations with individual unions, and I and part of our government relations team and lobbying team have sat down with Tim Dre from the AFL-CIO, his staff, and on a number of occasions, and continue to have conversations. I am scheduled to have a conversation with staff this week to try and, like I said, reach sort of a comprehensive proposal. We have flagged some discussion points with them. We actually think some of the ways they treat individual issues like transit ambassadors and recovery ratio are actually well thought out and very thoughtful in how they draft that language. So that's all good. To your point about, I think it has focused the conversation a little bit in Springfield and provided some momentum around particularly the governance side. It is not, none of these things are settled. I would never report to you that it's in the bag. But I do think there's a pathway that's emerging on some of the reform side of things. And then frankly, the revenue discussion was always going to be more complicated. And that's, I'm hopeful that we get to that conversation here in the next couple of weeks.
Director Koterek.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll say that from the business leadership in the region, they're also going to sort of opine on this soon, most likely through an opinion editorial, and I'll share that with folks as that develops. And I think, to Dr. Sagar's point, having a resolution and building consensus on the board is certainly going to be difficult, but I think it's an effort that's certainly worthwhile. And to make it as informed as possible, I think we should hear from the major stakeholders, whether it's labor with their position, the advocates for sure. There's key county leadership that, Dr. Sagar is very linked up with and many of the other boards, but the county chairs and the executives, particularly a few of them, they've been meeting quite regularly and taking a leadership role in that, as well as the city. So I think, as we develop the consensus, I think it's important for us to hear directly from them and really get, each individual or group position on this as we develop our own. Some of us were fortunate enough to take part in the PART plan, where a lot of this stuff was, discussed at length. But it's a new time, and there's been a lot of developments, and the fiscal situation is different, and the federal situation is different. And so I think the board collectively hearing from each of those stakeholders to hear why they feel their position is best could make our final consensus position the best possible.
Thank you. Anything else for Rob? We'll see you at the hearing in Springfield next week. Thank you. Keep up your great work. Kyle and Anthony, thank you too. All right, let's move on to 7A. Resolution certifying financial results for the fourth quarter of 2024, and Sarah and Malik will be presenting.
Hi,
Morning.
Chairman, members of the board, Malik Vaishnav, Deputy Executive Director of Planning Capital Programming. As we have done the past several months, I will cover a quick update, hopefully quick, on system performance measures before Sarah jumps into the financials that you'll be voting on. So my part is information only. Next slide, please. One more. So today I'd like to provide you some background on how RTA over many years has established performance reporting programming, and end with an update on the omnibus bill and the progress there. As you can see here, since the 2000 Act Amendment, RTA has set a vision of transparency and accountability, and it has come in various forms. So I'll quickly walk through each of them that you see here. That starts with peer comparison reporting, comparing our CTA Metro Pay services to our peers across the nation. On a quarterly basis, there's a financial and performance report. There's the Chicago Transit Dashboard that we have, combining a lot of the monthly updates with the latest data, and finally the omnibus data requirements. Next slide, please. So starting with the update on the regional peer review. So we use the National Transportation Database that audits previous year's data quite a bit later. So this is the 2023 regional peer review highlight. So a little bit old, but that's the latest audited data, where we compare the performance of certain metrics locally with the top 10 most populous regions in the country. So the Chicago region traditionally has performed well for ridership and passenger miles traveled. As you see here, we rank second for those two metrics. We have ranked third for four metrics: vehicle miles per service square mile area. If we had more service, we would be higher up there. Unlinked passenger trips, now regionally, we are starting to fall behind LA, but because of ridership recovery since COVID, could be second again regionally at some point. Passenger miles traveled, we are per capita is behind New York and Boston, and fare revenue per ride is behind New York and Boston as well. Next slide, please. Here we compare each of the modes and where we are compared to the rest of the country and our peers. CTA bus, as you see, has some of the highest fare recovery ratio and revenue per rider or mile. And that's really us having done a really good job coming out of the pandemic, making sure people continue to pay their fares and have one of the lowest sort of evasion ratio, and that has really helped us stay on top. CTA Rail has the lowest operating cost per vehicle revenue hour. PACE has the highest fare revenue per trip and highest capital expenditure per trip in the range of other suburban comparable agencies. And ADA Paratransit has lowest average vehicle age and lowest percentage of vehicles in service beyond useful life. Next slide, please. Moving on to the quarterly finance and performance report. It's a long history with RTA. Throughout the years, it was primarily used as a financial reporting mechanism, but has expanded to include, at the recommendation of the RTA board in the past, year-to-date regional and service board specific performance information. And most recently, we have added the unaudited 2024 data on ridership, revenue, service miles, and contextual information like gas prices and other things that impact ridership. This report is submitted along with the quarterly financials every February, May, August, and November, and the latest is already published on our website, RTEM. So it's a great comparison of where we are. The chart on the right shows the 2024 ridership growth in our region by mode. 35 million rides were added in 24 compared to 23. It was a great year. CTA bus added 20 million rides. CTA Rail added 10 million, Metra 3 million, and Pace Suburban gained over 2 million rides. EDA Paratransit gained 300,000 rides compared to 2023. So it's been a great year for ridership recovery. Next slide, please. Moving on to our new dashboard, we presented this to you in October when we launched it. One of the key areas that I wanted to mention is the graph up there. We have been tracking compared to 2019 how our service recovery has been going. And as you see now, we are basically recovering the amount of service out there to 2019 levels, and in some cases starting to exceed our peers. So it's been a great year of progress for 2024, getting to this point where our service is starting to match where it should be in compared to budget and compared to our peers. Next slide, please. Lastly, I think we went in the wrong direction. Oh no, that's the right slide. Sorry. Lastly, I wanted to update you since the board voted in December on certifying compliance with the Public Act 103-0281. That happened in December. As we noted then, as you directed us, we plan to make additional improvements in 2025, including further development of safety, public safety efficiency matrix, and continue to seek public input. We met as a working group with CTA, Metra, and Pace just last week to discuss some of the updates, and happy to report that now all three agencies have gone to their citizen advisory boards and sought input and feedback, which was one of the items that we needed to complete. We are also discussing ways to document the effectiveness of public safety and security initiatives, but also acknowledge that it is a difficult challenge regionally because there's no centralized repository of crime and other information. So we will use different avenues to get there, and I'll talk about it a little bit in a second. So the next few slides give one example each of how 2024 data for the whole year looks like. So if we go to the next slide for CTA, here on their dashboard, it's showing the focus on reported complaints, and they split it out in many ways. So I picked security of how many complaints they're receiving, and it shows divided by ridership, but also overall complaints. And as the year has gone on, we have seen significant reduction in the number of complaints CT is directly receiving. Obviously, that's just one way of looking at things, and we'll continue to find different ways to report that, but it's a good 12-month look in one chart to see how things are going. Next slide. Here's an example of Metra's omnibus data reporting page, also focusing on safety and security for 2024. Metra is providing the number of federally reportable safety incidents for each month. One of the things we had discussed is that Metra put in a new reporting data system in early 2024. So that's why starting March 24, you see additional data on grade crossing enforcement, the number of police officer train rides, and police officer station checks. So some of that data, as you can see, not only is being reported, but see an increase as the year progresses in their efforts. We'll continue to work on additional ways to report information in this area this year. And next slide on Pace. Here's the look at Pace's website section on staffing levels. We can see that Pace has also seen improvements in hiring and training of bus operators with a net increase of 82 positions in 2024. So again, both on safety, security, service, we have seen significant improvements, and we have seen that correlated with the ridership gains at all three agencies. The performance reporting program will continue to evolve and respond to your feedback and stakeholder feedback, and I'll be back in May to update you on the continued progress. We'll pause here for any questions before turning it over to Sarah.
Any questions? I always love the peer data. We could all sit here and pat ourselves on the back, but I like that data because it gives me a dose of reality as to where we stand. Sarah, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm Sarah Rubino, Principal Analyst in the Budget Division. Today, I'll be asking the board to certify the service board's financial results through the fourth quarter of 2024 against the adopted operating budgets. These recommendations are based on unaudited financial results as reported to the RTA by the service boards. We will inform the board if the audited financial results of the service boards, once received, differ materially from these unaudited results. Let's take a look at our primary metric for evaluating substantial accordance with budget, the operating deficit performance. Next slide, please. The favorable trend continued through December for each mainline service board, while ADA paratransit result worsened to 8.4% unfavorable, as ridership has driven purchased transportation expense proportionately above budget. However, in December, PACE provided the RTA with a satisfactory action plan, requesting the utilization of the RTA ADA Paratransit Reserve Fund, which contains sufficient funds to cover the estimated 2024 ADA paratransit funding shortfall, now projected to be $19.8 million. The exact amount of additional funding required will be communicated to the RTA during PACE's year-end close process and will require board approval in the coming months. PACE suburban service continues to experience very favorable results versus budget. PACE's headcount remained about 15% below budgeted levels, which in turn led to lower than budgeted labor expense, while fuel, insurance, and other expense categories were also favorable. Further, PACE ridership exceeded expectations for the year, producing favorable system-generated revenue, which also contributed to their favorable operating deficit. It's worth noting that PACE's adopted 2025 budget had the lowest budget-to-budget expense growth among the service boards at 1.8%. This should have a mitigating effect on the favorability of PACE's results when we begin reporting on those next month. Also in December, CTA and Metra drew down their remaining federal relief funding. It's now being held in reserve at all three service boards to be utilized for operating shortfalls. The favorable operating deficit performance in 2024 has little impact on the projected timing and magnitude of the fiscal cliff. This is because the current early 2026 cliff projection is based on the 2025 budget and is grounded in a 2024 reforecast, which already accounted for most of the positive variance shown here. In other words, these year-end results had largely already been incorporated into the current 2026 cliff projection. With the regional operating deficit favorable to budget by 5.7% and a proposed remedy for the ADA funding shortfall in place, staff recommends a finding of insubstantial accordance with budget for the fourth quarter CTA, Metra, PACE, ADA, and regional results. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Any questions or comments? Yes, Director Quatert.
Just a question on the reserve fund use for ADA. We mentioned a satisfactory action plan, and if you can share that with the board, I think it'd be interesting for all of us to see on how that's being managed. And then a question of the source of funds. You mentioned the reserve fund being used and coming to us for approval next month. What's the balance of that reserve fund, and what is the decision between using that reserve fund versus, say, the COVID relief funding that we know that they're still funding back, and what's the dynamic around that?
Right. So the balance of the ADA reserve fund right now is 33.7 million. So after about 20 million is used, we'll have a little over 13 million left in the reserve. It's just been a longstanding practice. That's what the reserve is expressly there for. PACE does have other reserves on the suburban service side, but we've always honored their longstanding policy, which separates their suburban service and ADA entities.
Just say, as we, again, Rob brought this out about the importance of solving this fiscal crisis soon, is I think we may find ourselves pushed into a very difficult zero-sum game as we get closer and closer. Which service board has what amount of funding, and which one will have to produce, cuts first? Because right now we've allocated numbers and it's theirs. And so you can have a pretty decent amount of inequity in the system where one, agency is literally shutting down service while another is is having a pretty decent balance. And this, I think this might be sort of the canary of showing what's kind of coming forth if we don't solve it. And it's something that I think we should keep a close eye on.
Understood. Thank you.
And generally, Tom, I mean, Chicago's done much better than many of our peers in trying to not draw down that money prematurely and using it wisely. That's a great point. Any other questions? Well, how about a motion and a second to approve these financial results? Director Mondero moves that we adopt it, seconded by Director Yonan. And with that, Madam Secretary, how about a roll call?
Dr. Carey, Dr. Colson? Yes. Dr. Gathing?
Yeah.
Dr. Gorman?
Aye.
Dr. Jenkins, or Dr. Groven?
Aye.
Dr. Jenkins?
Aye.
Dr. Katarik?
Aye.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes.
Dr. Mondero? Dr. Pang? Dr. Rotondo?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Dr. Sauger? Dr. Yonan?
Aye.
And Chairman Dillard.
Yes.
We have,
And
Martina.
the resolution certifying the financial reports for the fourth quarter of 2024 is adopted. Thank you, Malik and Sarah, very much. 7B is a resolution honoring retiring CTA President Dorval Carter Jr. I wish to honor and thank Dorval for his many years of service to the CTA over the past 26 years, including time as president of the agency since 2015, as an active partner and advocate for public transit in America, including his time at the U.S. DOT. And my statement when Dorval announced his retirement after the red line signing ceremony is all in front of you this morning. But Joey, we have a resolution, and could you read the whereases, please?
Whereas Dorval R. Carter Jr. has served as president of the Chicago Transit Authority, CTA, since 2015. Whereas Mr. Carter began his CTA career in 1984 as a staff attorney and worked at the agency for a combined 26 years as acting president, executive vice president, chief administrative officer, and eventually president. Whereas Mr. Carter worked for nearly 15 years at the federal level in roles at the United States Department of Transportation and the Federal Transit Administration. Whereas Mr. Carter is respected and admired by his transit colleagues at the RTA, Metra, PACE, and is a dedicated and concerned public servant. Whereas president, some of Mr. Carter's key accomplishments included the Red Line Extension Project, the single largest capital construction project in the agency's history, the All Stations Accessibility Program, the renovation of the 95th Dan Ryan Terminal, and CTA's Second Chance Program. Whereas Mr. Carter was the recent chair of the American Public Transportation Association, APTA, is current chair of APTA's Bus Manufacturing Task Force. Whereas throughout his career, Mr. Carter has been a continuous advocate for CTA and for transit riders across the region. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Regional Transportation Authority hereby honors Dorval R. Carter Jr. for his years of conscientious and dedicated service to the people of Northeastern Illinois and for his commitment to enhancing the stability and integrity of the region's public transportation system for all the residents of the region.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on that? Dorval is going to be the CEO of St. Anthony's Hospital on the west side, where his father, he's been on the board for many years there, where his father was a physician. If anybody knows anything about the safety net or hospital systems of Chicago, that's just a vital hospital for the community that it serves. So Dorval will continue to be a civic leader in an area that desperately needs healthcare on the west side of Chicago. So he's not going away. With that, how about a motion and a second to approve the resolution? We'll just do it by oral vote. Director Mondero moves that we adopt the resolution for President Carter, seconded by Director Jenkins. All those in favor of the resolution say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And the ayes have it, and the resolution is adopted. And Joey, so we're going to send a copy to Dorval and great. No, thank you very much.
I'll make one quick comment on
Yes,
that.
please, Director
I
Colson.
remember having an interaction with Dorval Carter once, and Metro had just pointed out that they were running rolling stock from the Eisenhower administration. And so Dorval and I joked that he is running his trains over infrastructure from the William McKinley administration. Remarkable job, remarkable man.
He called, and it wasn't that long ago. It was within the last year or so, and he called on a Friday afternoon, and he said, "I think you're a lover of Chicago history, Kirk. You'll love the fact that we just took out a piece of steel from, I guess it was probably the Lake Street, area of the L, and we found a stamped on the steel, and it said Carnegie like 1888 or 98." Right. And he said, and I've already given it to the Chicago Historical Museum, but it's just mind-boggling how long some of this, and it's a great thing, how long this infrastructure lasts. A lot of it's a testament to the people who, from organized labor who take care of this on a daily basis. But we wish Dorval well. Nora's doing a great job, not your Nora, but the new Nora at the CTA. She's a known commodity over there. So she's got big shoes to fill, but she's off to a great start there. 7C is the approval of travel expense reimbursements. Any questions or comments there? If not, how about a motion? Motion by Dr. Sager, seconded by Director Rotondo, that we adopt 7C. And Joey, why don't you just take a roll call on that one, if you would?
Sure. Dr. Carey, Dr. Colson?
Yes.
Dr. Gathing?
Yes.
Dr. Gorman? I'll come back to her. Dr. Groven?
Yes.
Dr. Jenkins?
Aye.
Dr. Katark?
Aye.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes, yes.
Dr. Mondero?
Yes.
Dr. Pang? Dr. Rotondo?
Yes.
Dr. Ross?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Dr. Sager? Dr. Yonan?
Aye.
Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
And Dr. Gorman? She's
That's all right. It's adopted. Thank you very much. And 7C is approved. Item 8 is the new business. Any new business to come before us? Got a lot of work to do, and staff is working extremely hard. So we'll be back with more business, because our next meeting is our next official meeting of the board is March 27th of 2025 at 9 a.m. Any further business to come before the board this morning? Seeing none, how about a motion and a second to adjourn? Director Ryan moves, we adjourn, seconded by Director Groven. All those in favor say aye. Aye. You
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
No opposition.